All right. Well, we are recording and live. So, welcome to the community meeting for Thursday, April 27th. We have Jason volunteering to note take. So, thank you, Jason. We have a demo as our first point of affairs. Torin, are you here?
Hi, guys. I'm here.
Hey, fantastic. Do you want to share your screen and kick us off?
Okay. Okay. You should be able to see a terminal right now. Let me know if that's visible.
Can see, yep.
Okay, cool. Okay, yeah, so just briefly, what I'm doing today is demoing some work that we've been doing within Sig Federation that's targeted for like the 1.7 as an alpha feature. And so at a high level, what we want to do basically is give admins, cluster admins, policy-based control over the placement of federated resources. And so the motivation behind this work is that many organizations want to define placement policies based on all kinds of requirements around things like cost, regulation, technical requirements, internal conventions, and so on. And so the challenge is that not only do these requirements differ across organizations, but even within a single organization over time, they evolve. And so again, the high level thing that we're trying to do here is give admins a way to codify those requirements as policies in a way that's programmable and automated, but still easy to author, manage, and understand. Okay, so enough talking. I'll get to the demo now. Okay, so for this demo, what we're going to do is work with an example application that's Nginx. So it's not very exciting, but that's what I've got. And we have a policy that states in English, essentially, that some apps have to be deployed on clusters in EU zones with sufficient PCI compliance. And so we're going to work with replica sets here, but keep in mind that this could be applied to other resource types or even like groups of resources. And so what we have here is this Nginx replica set that has this requires EU jurisdiction annotation. And this basically tells the system that this application must be deployed on clusters within EU zones, say for like regulatory reasons. Okay, so what we're going to do is go ahead and create this replica set, and the federated control plane is going to go ahead and deploy it. And so what we can do is look at the replica set to see sort of what's happened here. So first of all, we'll see that the requires EU jurisdiction that we specified is on the replica set. But also that there's this replica set preferences annotation that's been applied to the replica set that we didn't specify in our manifest. And so this replica set preferences annotation is what tells the Federation controller manager where to place the replica set, so which clusters this replica set can run on. And so the value of this, we can see here, has it's this clusters object, and it only includes 2 clusters, right? There's Europe West 1 and Europe West 2. But not this third central cluster, US central cluster that we have, because that's not within jurisdiction. And so if we go and look at the individual clusters, we'll see that indeed the replica set has only been deployed in Europe. And so there's 2 replicas in Europe West 1, and then another 2 replicas will be in Europe West 2, because we just specified a weight of 1, so it's even. Sorry, my internet's a little slow here. And then if we look at the the US central cluster, indeed, there are no resources there. Okay, so great, that works. How did this actually get accomplished? So I popped up a little diagram. And so what this shows is sort of the flow through the system when the developer requests this replica set be deployed. So first of all, they specify the replica set. They give this requires EU jurisdiction annotation. That basically gets into the API server, which is running an admission controller that's calling out to our policy engine and supplying the replica set as input. The policy engine takes the input, takes the policies that it has loaded, and then computes a value for that replica set preferences annotation before returning it back to the API server, the admission controller. At that point, the admission controller applies the annotation, the replica set preferences annotation, to the resource, and then the resource is basically created and deployed normally. Okay, so what's not shown there, though, is the policy itself. I don't have too much time here, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but I'll highlight the important bits. So this is the policy, basically. We have this high-level declarative language that you use to author policies. The policies are basically, you can think of them as just like collections of rules. And rules basically define JSON values. So what we have here is this annotations rule that's defining the value for the replica set preferences key. And in this language, rules can basically reference other rules. And so here we have the annotations rule referencing this other rule, replica set clusters. And so what happens is that when the admission controller queries the policy engine, it's basically querying this annotations rule to get the value for the annotation. And then the policy engine evaluates the rules and produces that annotation value. Okay, so what happens is that this reference here, replica set clusters, gets replaced with the value defined by that other rule. And so what replica set clusters is doing is basically filtering out clusters where this replica set, where the input replica set can't be deployed. And so we look at all the clusters that are known by the policy engine. We filter out ones that are excluded by the input because perhaps the developer has specified some intent there. And then we also filter out ones that are not allowed based on the jurisdiction of the cluster. And so then in turn, the invalid jurisdiction is defining a set of clusters where this replica set can't run. And so we say a replica set can't be deployed on a cluster if, in this case, the replica set requires EU jurisdiction, but that cluster is not within an EU zone. And so here we're looking at the region attribute on the Federation cluster object. Okay, so that's like the first part of the policy, but what we also want to do is define, or is enforce the policy such that apps that require PCI compliance don't get accidentally deployed on clusters that aren't PCI certified. So what we're going to do is define a rule called insufficient PCI compliance. And this is going to produce a set of clusters that don't meet PCI compliance for the input. And so it's going to look very similar to what we've done above for invalid jurisdiction. So we're going to check to see whether or not the input includes an annotation requiring PCI compliance. And then what we're going to do is check whether the cluster has been annotated to indicate that it's PCI certified. And so we're just going to say if the annotation is not present, then it's not PCI certified. We're not going to worry about PCI levels or anything like that for now. And so then we'll add a reference to that rule here. And that's all we have to do for now. Okay, so the policy engine is basically deployed alongside the rest of the federated control plane. And we have a service that's exposing the policy engine's API. And so what we're going to do is push the policy into the policy engine just directly through its API right now. And then if we go ahead and annotate the cluster, one of the clusters to indicate it's PCI certified, we'll see that when we try to deploy an application that requires PCI compliance here, it'll only go to that Europe West 1 cluster now. Okay, and so then we can again observe the annotations on the replica set. And sure enough, the demo gods have not been kind to me, and the annotation is not showing up as I would like. So that's not good. 1 second. So what I would have expected to happen here is that the cluster's value would only contain the replica set, the Europe West 1 cluster, but something's gone wrong. So just give me 1 sec. I'll see if I can. I probably made a mistake in the policy. So let me just take a quick look to see if I can figure that out.
Tim says annotation is spelled wrong in your policy.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Okay, so let's fix that. Okay, so that should be it. Yeah, live demos are always tricky. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just, I've modified that. So I just need to re-upload the policy now. Give me a sec. So I'm just going to run the same command from before. I can just find it. Okay, sorry.
We've got about a minute.
Okay. Okay, so maybe that's not the most, okay, so what we would have seen was this replica set clusters would have been set to just the Europe West 1 cluster. And so what would have happened was when we query the Europe West 1 cluster, we would see that only that it was deployed only to that one cluster. What I wanted to show also was that we can handle basically conflicts in the input. So if we have another, if we have another a replica set here that's requiring EU jurisdiction, but it's mistakenly requested to be deployed on a US central cluster, the policy will take care of that. And so down below in the policy, we have a rule that's raising error conditions. And so what it does here essentially says, if the set of input cluster names if the difference between the set of input cluster names and the policy defined cluster names is non-empty, then there's a conflict essentially with the input. And so if we do try to create that replica set, what we're going to see is that it gets rejected. And so you can see it got rejected here, and it was rejected with the reason that was defined by the policy. So one or more requested clusters are not allowed. Okay, so I think that's just about my time. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in this federated placement stuff, check out Sig Federation. If you're interested in policy in general, you can check out the Open Policy Agent project. We have Slack, and you can check it out on GitHub. Okay, thanks a lot. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Torn. Do we have any quick questions?
Nope.
If not, okay, cool. We will roll right into releases.
Cool.
So for the 1.7 release, Don, do you happen to be on the line? If not, that's okay. For 1.7, we are still looking for someone to fill the testing lead, which is responsible for looking at the CI signal coming across test grid and a bunch of other, some other related places, and giving a go no go signal week over week on our status to release. So I will link in the thread asking for candidates. That's in a thread in Kubernetes dev. So if you are interested in filling that role, please sign up. Announcement from Ehor related to that. The feature repo will close on the 1st of May. So that's next week here. There's a brand new template that Ehor has linked in. So that's hopefully much simpler, easier to use than the previous template. So it should be, hopefully we'll get better usage of that. And yes, if you've got a 1.6 feature that is now, or a previous feature that is now scheduled for 1.7, please update your template, the checklists there in the description on your PR. If you don't get around to it, Ehor will be doing a reconciliation loop himself. Ehor, you're on the line. Did you want to say anything else about the new template or features for 1.7?
You said everything what I expected to see. Thank you, Caleb. So yeah, we have an updated feature template. We have extended the deadline for submitting the features based on the community feedback and based on the current status of the features repo. So I have noticed that so many features that are expected to be in 1.7 haven't still been updated to 1.7. So we have extended the deadline, and please update your features before Monday. Before the end of day Monday.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you, Ehor.
Any questions, probably, if we are here and probably someone has anything to discuss about this?
Let me look at the chat. So the question about the testing role, the testing, this is a little bit different than the actual test infrastructure work. This is mostly testing, so CI signal is mostly about looking at the results of the continuous integration runs, and keeping a sharp eye out for regressions on the various suites that would block the release. If we can we'll keep the release train rolling. We have 1.6. Anthony, are you on the line? Doesn't seem like it. Oh, great.
And I don't expect Marcin to be on the line. However, he says 1.7 was released. 1.5.7 was released today.
Yep. And there's a link in the notes to the GitHub release page there. On 1.6, we're still looking for a patch manager from Google, and Marcin will be handling patch management while Anthony's on vacation. So if that is, does anyone have any questions about the releases, either the upcoming 1.7 or the previous 1.6? If not, then we will get right into SIG updates. We'll start with SIG contributor experience. Elsie, are you ready for the update?
Yeah, so I'm going to drop in channel a link. So today I'm going to report on ContribX's goals for the 1.7 release. And you're welcome to follow along. We are looking to target 4 things in the upcoming release. The first thing is we hope to provide a little bit more consistency. Some of the ways that we're hoping to do this is to make sure there's a standard subset of labels across all of the repositories, and to make sure that the bot commands are all in the same format. We also want to improve the automation process to promote the velocity, and doing this through the PR workflow and designer review and issue triage. One of the ways that we're hoping to do this is to ping inactive reviewers and reassign PRs so that PRs are merged faster. Okay, so I'm seeing that the link is not open to everyone. So I will, once I'm done, I will make sure that the link works for everybody. Then the third thing that we're hoping to do is to ensure that organizational policies and automation mechanisms are clearly documented and easily discoverable. We want to evaluate the release note policy, establish goals of writing release notes, and redefine our approach. And we also want to verify all of the templates and make sure that they're updated and optimized for contributor experience. And make sure that all bot commands are consistent and easily discoverable. And then we're also focusing on metrics this release as well to make sure that our policies are data-driven. Yeah, so if you have any questions about that, no.
So yeah, just going back on that, we actually have a company that's helping us out. They did a demo at the contributor experience. This is Garrett speaking, by the way. There's a company called Sappho that did a demo at the last contributor experience meeting, and they've got a tool that actually allows us to easily build dashboards to look at things like time to merge, to look at things like time to first comment, as well as number of merges per week, number of merges per company per week or per contributor per week. They have a SQL database backing it up, but you don't actually have to know how to write code in order to add dashboards. And they've kind of got a neat little feed option that allows you to kind of select your top graphs to look at. So we're looking at working with them a little bit more. A couple of us from contributor experience are kicking the tires and playing with the tool a little bit more before making a final decision.
Hey Garrett, when you have a chance, can you put a link to that in the minutes? Any information about Sappho?
Absolutely.
Fantastic, thanks.
Cool wheel.
All right. Do we have any questions for Elsie about contributor experience? If not, we can roll into SIG storage update. I see you, Michael.
Sorry. Hi. So mostly what I'm going to try to go over is the face-to-face that we had recently. It was very, very well attended, surprisingly so. I think we had people, we sort of had the normal folks from, let me just see if I can get the invite list again. So I've asked Garrett to post to the chat, and I've added it to the community minutes. the links to the agenda items and the minutes of the face-to-face. But the attendance were great. It was the normal folks who were always there: Red Hat, Diamante, Google, Dell, NetApp, and Portworx. And then, we had a lot of other folks showing up: IBM, Linbit, Salesforce, Pure Storage, OpenStack, a bunch of people who are, very senior folks just doing things on their own behalf. And then some other Linux companies that were showing up for their own work. Room maybe was full of 40 people, maybe more. It was hosted by EMC, and it was, it felt good. This SIG is alive, thriving with more new people, and everyone seems to be integrating themselves pretty well. The topics, the agenda, one thing to note is that a bunch of things that we had thought we had to talk about, we didn't, because they were implemented in 1.6, things like mount options and other areas of complexity. So this was a pleasant surprise. But there were some big things that we're diving into in the storage SIG, and that's why I wanted to talk about it today. I thought it'd be really cool to share. The first one that we dove into was snapshot design and what we're doing with snapshots. And it's been a long sort of back and forth of whether or not this is a feature that Kubernetes needs, or is this something for storage administrators to handle on their own. And after a lot of debate, we've come to grips with the fact that we need to have some features of snapshot capabilities inside of Kubernetes. And like the Goldilocks problem, we have to make sure we don't have too many and we don't have too little. And there's a really sweet design. I was pretty impressed with what the SIG has come up with at this time, because the model is now a 2-object model that's very consistent with the way we handle volumes in general. I really urge folks to take a look at it if you're curious. Yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit more intuitive than some of the other ideas that we had. And it came about, I don't think any one company could have come about with this decision on their own. It really involved everyone working together. The basic functionality will be, creating, removing snapshots. The trickier cases were, how do we handle these between namespaces? How does this work with the lifecycle of the snapshot? And what are the permissions and ACLs of the snapshot? And how does this also work with whether or not you want to clone it, or the birth of a volume? How do you create volumes possibly from a snapshot? So please take a look. This is still in the design phase, and I think that the design is getting fairly solid. And there's even the model the storage group has taken is the storage SIG is kind of an update every other week of all the other events going on or efforts in the storage SIG. So I think there's a bi-weekly or a weekly meeting on snapshots that occurs. And so if you're interested just in snapshots, you can show up to that one. If you're interested in commenting on the design or areas like that, please feel free to go look at the docs and read and ask questions on the storage SIG mailing list. Please realize that there's been a lot of context and earlier thought brought into it. So maybe start with trying to ask questions about context on the list before going in the doc and being like, this makes no sense. Because a lot of things initially may seem confusing, but make sense if you look at the full ecosystem of volumes and Kubernetes in general. But what's neat is that it looks like we're making good progress to possibly agreeing on where we're going to be with snapshots this cycle. And then there's already prototype work and making progress cross continents for implementing this, maybe 1.7, probably 1.8. The next item that came up, and is a really one that's sort of in the heart and soul, kind of I think had a logjam over the last few releases for Kubernetes storage, is plugins. And one thing that we kind of realized was releases 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5 of storage for Kubernetes has really been focused on taking a lot of the upheaval and re-architect work that we did for mounting and unmounting volumes and really fleshing it out and stabilizing it. So there has been a lot of work, especially big thanks to Diamante and Chakri, on our plugin model and plugin API, but it was sort of on the back burner. Well, people talked about it a lot, but a lot of the real work was and focus was going on in stabilizing the system overall. I think that it actually worked out really well because there was so much pre-thinking and pre-worrying about storage plugins that by the time we finally were able to really focus on it full force, it's made a lot of progress. I'm going to explain the wording because the wordings are really confusing, and it bears the 3 minutes that it's going to take. How much time do I got, by the way? Like, do I have like 5 minutes or 8 minutes for the whole storage SIG?
You should be fine.
Okay, so this is confusing. The problem that we're trying to solve at the end of the day is having storage plugins work outside of the Kubernetes repo. And the reason for that is that we don't want storage vendors. There's so many storage vendors in Kubernetes that we don't want to have a very high review burden for the core members of the storage system, the storage SIG. And also we want them to be able to iterate on their plugins with a decoupled from the releases. We also don't, we're already seeing way too many plugins in tree, and it's just a large burden overall. Initially, we now have an API called Flex 1.0, which is got many of the abstractions that we need, but the plugins are still in tree. And a lot of this work was done, as I said earlier, by Chakri, and the Diamante team has been offering quite a bunch of resources. And this design has been going through many iterations and was presented in the last face-to-face. While this work was going on, other orchestration systems out there like Cloud Foundry, Docker, and Mesosphere noticed that they were having the same challenges with storage plugins that we were, and brought forth the idea, hey, if we could solve this problem with semantically similar approaches, this would benefit the whole community of container orchestration. And so the idea of having a spec that would conform to the same overall ideas and methodology came about, and it was initially called CVI, for Container Volume Interface, and eventually became the name CSI, which is really bad for Kubernetes because we have another CSI system, but really kind of cool for people who like the old TV show, because we get to talk about it a lot. And neat also for storage overall, because it stands for Container Storage Interface, which is more descriptive for really what the problem it's trying to solve. CSI is a spec, and it is a specification for the sort of life cycle of how plugins and volumes should interact in containers orchestration systems overall, even larger than Kubernetes. One of the things that we made very clear to the people working on CSI, which was a loose affiliation of these different container orchestration teams or companies or organizations, was that while we would pay a lot of attention and contribute to this as a SIG, we also did not want Kubernetes to be beholden to it. And if things really did diverge, it was kind of going to be like, sayonara, this has taken so long to get out of tree plugins working in SIG storage that we don't want to slow that velocity down. So far, we've been very, very lucky. It's actually, I think, helped out quite a bit. G from Mesosphere, Saad and Chakri, another person from Docker, Tim, myself, a few other people have spent a lot of time on this spec, and it turns out to have aligned very, very well with both Flex 1.0 and what we want to do for out-of-tree plugins in storage SIG. The implementation of CSI is, what is the other existing CSI within Kubernetes? I'm not exactly...
Flex volume.
Flex volume, thank you. The implementation of CSI and the next step of Flex 1.0 is going to be called Flex 2.0. And as CSI is getting finally nailed down, we're going to implement the out-of-tree work and the other pieces of functionality that we actually feel we need now from doing this investigation in Kubernetes, and we're going to call it Flex 2.0. And we expect that that work will hopefully go faster due to all of this pre-work. And it doesn't actually look like it will be a lot of coding work to put the implementation interface into Kubernetes. But of course, having all the plugins move over and doing the certification for those plugins and making sure that the validation and frameworks are up to date so that when you put the plugins in, people can have confidence that they actually conform is probably going to take a while. But in any case, it does look like good progress is being made here, and that things are coordinating fairly well. And the SIG had a deep presentation of the CSI proposal, which you can find here on the minutes, and it went like butter. One issue technically came up, which I want to talk about here, but other than that, there was a lot of agreement and a lot of this feeling of this is good work, and that this was work that was done transparently throughout the SIG. The one thing that was interesting as CSI was being presented was that, I'm sorry, the idea of supporting block interface and not just POSIX file system interface was introduced in CSI. The reason this has come about is that it's becoming more and more apparent that many of the plugins and technologies that want to integrate with Kubernetes are offering block interfaces and not just file system interfaces. And it looks like this is a model that we can integrate fairly well into the lifecycle of plugins and volumes, and that would be advantageous to have in Kubernetes. And it also seems to be something that aligns well with cloud-native storage technologies overall. So as a result, CSI incorporates the ability to have both file system and block, linear base address interfaces inside its plugin system. It does bring up the idea of what are we going to do with object storage, and that is something that we haven't thought through that well just yet.
Well, specifically,
Please.
block is something you can build a file system on top of, and they'll be serviced to containers as file systems.
Yep.
Yeah. So object storage is a whole other
Arena.
Yes.
And so
that's application level storage.
Right. And so my kind of personal belief is that those sorts of object storage ideas belong more in sort of like the app SIG and is not really something the storage SIG should have within boundaries. But it was also something that we didn't completely converge on in the storage SIG face-to-face.
Okay. Yeah, and they should definitely come to like SIG apps and even the SIG service catalog with those use cases. Because if you look at what kinds of black box services applications need to access, it's things like storage systems, databases, message queues, etc. So object storage, things like MinIO, Ceph, block storage, or object storage, etc., are definitely an important category, but they're not the only thing in this category.
Yeah, I think there's more work to be done, but I think starting with file and block is a good way. And I think we all
file and block are part of the container abstraction.
Yes.
Object storage is different.
Sweet. That's how I feel too. It has not been. I don't know if yet throughout the whole SIG we've agreed upon that. So I don't want to represent the SIG in that opinion yet, but I agree with that opinion myself personally. The Flex roadmap you can also see here inside the minutes. Like I said earlier, we're hoping to get 2.0 nailed down and possibly mostly implemented by the end of 2017. Another item that came up in the face-to-face SIG was the idea of modifying volumes once they've been created, being able to resize them and possibly changing other properties. I admit at this point I had to run, so I don't know as much intimately as the other parts of the SIG meeting, but security also came up. And then for the next day, we had a large discussion about containerized mounting. For those of you who don't know, I really urge you to check this out. This is just cool technology, and again, sort of leverages the neat things about containers. How do you solve the problem of, as container, one of the things that's going on is these storage plugins require the node to have kernel, user space, and other forms of dependencies on the system. How do we make this simple and easier for our users? And then how do we also make sure that we don't fragment our implementation of Kubernetes across different distros? And this is a problem I think that is much easier to run into in the storage area because the plugins are so diverse and have so much different types of functionality. So containerized mounting is something that we've started implementing already, and we have sort of a hacky implementation. Jan in Red Hat has taken that implementation and come up with a new, more generic design that I think will be more flexible. And everyone in the SIG was very excited about, allowing us to, to do the things I just described. That was sort of the beginning of the second day, but the lion's share of the discussion for the second day involved local storage. And there's a whole bunch of work here that the SIG storage community is going to be focusing on, probably for like a year at least. This is kind of like an 18-wheeler truck of functionality and complexity that is going to be going through the SIG storage area, affects resource management, and also will be affecting scheduler. Problems that we want to solve are things like basically making storage into a first-class citizen, much like CPU and memory. So challenges are being able to deal with capacity as a schedulable resource, being able to handle sort of types of storage like SSD and partitions, and treating that also as something that can be scheduled against for jobs. Handling local storage as ephemeral or as durable, being able to work with stateful sets in a more sophisticated way. there's no way I'm going to be able to capture all of the design work and all of the goals for local storage in this quick update to the community. So if you are interested in understanding this work, it is nuanced, it is deep, it is wide-reaching, and it's probably going to have some changes that affect things, including the way we schedule jobs to storage and how we even schedule jobs to non-storage related areas, as we're going to have to integrate those two systems. So please take a look at the minutes. There's some links there. There have been many docs that have been iterated several times over from all over the community. And I don't know, for me, if you're propeller head and you like storage or just sort of Kubernetes low-level internals, it's fun reading. I don't want to take too much time. I think that's basically all I've got to cover about today. There's a long list of things also that's coming into 1.7, so please feel free to go to the features repo and take a look at that. You can, filter across storage. I feel like I've taken up a lot of time. Be ready, there'll be a bunch of announcements at KubeCon. Oh, and then lastly, the CNCF. We had a member of the CNCF that also showed up at the storage SIG, and he's very excited about volunteering CNCF resources in order to possibly find a home for CSI and come up with, excuse me, ways to have cross-orchestration validation for CSI, and then possibly also find other resources to help with testing, documentation, and other areas inside storage SIG. And so I think it's fair to say that there is a storage working group in CNCF, and Kubernetes Storage SIG is beginning to figure out how best to engage with the CNCF's working group. And they seem to be enthusiastic about doing that too on their side. So hopefully that'll work out really well too this year. Is that work involved with the resource management working group from Caleb? Yes. The local storage work is being presented also in the resource management working group. In fact, for the face-to-face that's going on in May, it is on the agenda there, and there's a lot of topics that will be covered in both. This work is being done by Vish, and Vish is working, kind of straddling both resource management, node SIGs, and storage, as he is, sort of spearheading a lot of the design work here. So I do believe that the work is being cross-broadcasted across all these SIGs. It kind of has to be. Yeah, Caleb's typing really cool things. So the question here is, it'd be nice to have similar testing visibility for CSI and CNI. I agree. I'm kind of lucky in that I'm involved in both CNI and CSI, and I'm sort of shooting for similar goals as we're looking at both of them, and I'm able to talk to both teams, at least on the Google side. I'm not saying it's all on me at all, Caleb. Thank you for trying that out. But I think that, I know that I myself am trying to figure out the best ways to engage with the CNCF in all of these areas. And I know that other SIGs like networking and storage are also. Those are the only two working groups of CNCF that I know of. But they also neatly have a CSI and a CNI technologies that cross orchestrators. And I do think that there's a really good opportunity here to engage the CNCF on being able to validate plugins across orchestrators. And I think that there's, like I said, there's enthusiasm on CNCF to do that too. Anyone who's interested in working on that, please reach out to me or reach out to Brian Grant, who is also very well tied in tightly to the CNCF. I'm still trying to figure out how to engage with the CNCF, and so far it's been fun, but I wouldn't say I know how to do it that well just yet.
Yeah, so the CNCF working groups are a brand new thing, so that model is being worked out on the fly.
Okay, fantastic. So moving on to, we have our SIG Autoscaling update. Solid, do we have it?
Yeah, hi, everybody can hear me?
Yep.
All right, so I just wanted to give a rundown of progress update for the stuff that we're gonna be working on for 1.7. So we are looking at, first of all, updating the HPA API object status to have a conditions field, which should provide some more visibility into the current state of the HPA and any blocks that it is encountering, because that's one of the pieces of feedback that we got from a lot of users is it's hard to tell when your HPA is not scaling why it's not scaling. So we're hoping to offer some more visibility into that. The Google Poland folks have started to land the first bits of the prototype of the vertical pod autoscaler. It's in the Kubernetes/autoscaler repository, which is also now the new home for the cluster autoscaler. The cluster autoscaler itself also continues to improve somewhat. And then we are also hoping to start moving the resource metrics API towards GA, along with introducing the associated metrics server, which will be like kind of a lightweight version of Heapster that serves the resource metrics API. Also, finally, I have begun some more work on getting a Prometheus implementation of the custom metrics API. So hopefully, within this release, we shall see a kind of an end-to-end demo with auto-scaling based on custom metrics pulled from Prometheus. So if you're interested in that, please let me know. We are not going to be moving the custom metrics API to beta until we have one of those, like a good implementation that we can have people test out, though. So that will be pushed off till 1.8 probably.
Awesome. Do we have questions for Solly? If not, we can move into the 1.6 retrospective, part 2. Jason, you want to speak about that?
Yes, thanks, Caleb, for the handoff. So last week on Friday, we met and did the 1.6 retro, and we actually ran out of time. There were so many good commentaries and feedback about how things went that we decided to move forward into this meeting. If you could hold on 1 second, I'm going to paste a link to the document for the release retro into chat. So if you want to follow along here. If you scroll some way down the page there, you will see in bold, pause until community meeting 427. And basically, we're going to move forward from there in the document. Before we get started, because there's some people who may not have attended the retro before, I'm going to give my 30-second blurb on what this is for and how we want to conduct this, which is the intent is for us to improve every release we do. And a core way that we do that is to make observations about things that went well, things that maybe didn't go so well, and then really focus on things we can change in the 1.7 release lifecycle, which is currently underway. So in terms of doing that effectively, if you do have commentary about something that didn't go wrong or something you'd like to see different, please just make it constructive and try not to point fingers at people. Try and identify processes or things that can be changed easier than people, because people are hard to change. So let's move forward. And so at the end of each of these items is a set of initials, and I'll let the person speak to it. And I believe, Caleb Miles, you are the first one to speak.
Yes. So I guess it was still pretty important to be able to go down to Mountain View for the release. Just a note.
Okay. Great. Joe, you present on this meeting? Joe Beta, paging Joe Beta.
Nope, he is not here.
Plane. Yeah, he's on a plane, I think.
On a plane, all right. Sometimes it takes a while to unmute. Okay, so feels like we rushed release to line up with KubeCon. Could have more bake time for release candidate before official release. Actually, did anybody want to speak to that? Because I think that's a pretty important thing, because lining up with major events like KubeCon, that's a tough thing, right? Anybody want to speak to that?
Well, I guess like in the abstract, I certainly would prefer to see us have sort of quality-driven releases as opposed to marketing-driven releases. And I think if we use major events as our cadence, then we need to get way more aggressive about kicking things out in anticipation of hitting that fixed date.
Well, I think, yeah, so to some degree, we've always had marketing-driven releases from the initial 1.0 launch. It also just so happens that we do quarterly releases, and the events usually line up. But it's not always perfectly aligned. Really, we have quarterly releases. In terms of quality, yeah, we do need some quality, and in terms of kicking things out, we're going to have to be able to. A lot of features take more than one release, and certainly if we speed up the release cycle, that's going to be even more true. So we are going to need some kind of mechanism to kick things out. There are some issues in the community repo that I'll point people at. You should take a look. For example, there's some discussion of feature branches as one possible way to make that easier. If you have other ideas, drop them into issues in the community repo or email Kubernetes dev.
Great.
Also, one thing that I'm hoping that we can do with the SIG release is find ways to have people really hammer on the release candidates more. Maybe I'm wrong, but I get the feeling that folks are waiting for the .0 before they really start kicking the tires.
You're correct.
And I think that, what I have seen in the past is when you can shift that attention to the release candidates, my gosh, the surprises really, they minimize quite a bit. And so I think there's other things that we can do here too that might be able to help.
Well, so to that point, I think we just started using the phrase release candidate last release cycle. I don't know if that made a difference. I've heard Brian make the spiel about folks need to be looking at beta releases pretty much every release cycle that I've participated in. And we at Samsung have tried to do our part with sort of our small facet of testing of the new release and upgrade testing. But I think that the massive high signal upgrade testing that ramps up sort of towards the end of the release process, we might find we get less surprises if we sort of do that continuously rather than the last few weeks. Because that's really, I would love to encourage broad community participation. I'm not sure what more we can do than what we've tried in the past, but maybe we haven't tried all that much. But the most signal we've gotten is when we actually spin up a separate release branch and set up CI jobs and all that good stuff. And I'm wondering if it's possible to do that earlier.
So 3 thoughts. 1, absolutely great idea. I don't know if it's worth talking about that in SIG release or SIG testing about how to make that happen. And so I can't believe I'm so excited about a SIG release, but I am. And so I'll take a note and try to bring that up there.
There is upgrade testing on HET. Yeah. And there's been an effort to move more and more of the manual tests to automated tests. So I encourage anyone who's ever done any manual test to please help us automate those tests so that we can run them ahead in addition to running them on the release branch. Those tests should already be running and working when we cut the release branch. And as far as advertising beta releases, yes, I do say this every release. We haven't done a good job of advertising them and getting them out there. We should, tweak them. We should make sure they're higher quality. That's a great topic to discuss in SIG release about how we can make that happen.
Yeah, I think, and I could be wrong, I'm wrong a lot, but I think that the release candidates and alphas and betas have been around at least since I've joined Kubernetes about a year ago. New. Oh, release candidates new? Okay, yes. But alphas have been around.
We had previously treated the betas as release candidates, but in practice, they're just whatever we cut from the release branch when the release branch gets created, which is date-based, not quality-based. So they haven't been usable, and there's no documentation done when they're cut either. So effectively, every release, the .0 is the real release candidate. That's when everything's actually ready, when it has sufficient quality, and when the docs are done.
So how about we talk about this more in depth in SIG release? I think in both advertising and figuring out what releases we should put out there and how we test them is worthy of conversation.
Okay, I'm putting it in to do, when SIG release is released, then we'll go through that. And I also say that as part of SIG release's charter would be to actively chew through all of these bullet points because there's a ton of things in here for that SIG to look at.
Yeah, Jason, are these in the community meeting minutes then?
Right now we're in the 1.6 release retro document, which was linked in the chat.
Okay,
it is also linked in the community agenda.
All right, I'll follow up from Sarah, and I know that Phil isn't here. I know Caleb is, and between me and Caleb, we'll make sure that this is part of SIG release.
Great. Yeah, I also plan on participating if I can. So, Dan.
We've got a race from Tim.
Not to hijack a topic, but I'm totally hijacking a topic. One of the problems that we have with being able to test a candidate is a lot of people would love to, but being able to support what old people used to call shadow pooling, or putting a cluster manager on a cluster manager because we already have a cluster manager, would be a very beneficial way to allow us to do this release candidate testing. It is a known practice that many other people do in clustering solutions. So like large institutions do this type of thing all the time. Not with Kubernetes because we can't do that yet, but with other solutions. So.
Yes, we can run Borg on Borg.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that, Tim. And Dan, it looks like you might have another one here. Exception process took up too much release time and broke alpha contract with scheduled predicate. And we're going to run out of time. Holy moly, where'd the time go?
Yeah, and I don't think Dan's with us.
No, Dan, okay. So those, I guess we can, if he's passionate about those, Dan, if you're watching the video, please make a note at the next committee meeting if you need to. DC.
Oh, there's Dan.
I thought he was around, but.
He's not talking.
Oh. Well, let's move on the sake of time. And Dan, if you get this, say something. DC, I'm not sure who DC is. Let's see. Oh, that's probably Derek. Is that Derek? Derek, are you here? Probably not. So let's go down to flake resolution complicated by difficulty in attributing test and job ownership, and poor resolution of status tracking on GitHub issues. These are both really big deals, and impacted the release timing. So, MN.
It's Maru, probably.
Maru is also not on.
All right. Well, does anybody want to talk about the flakes and the impact on the release? Aaron, I'm looking at you.
I can speak to this a bit.
So the problem is I actually was absent for the entirety of the release, so I can't speak to the specific pain points.
Okay, I thought for some reason you had something to do with that.
But you have an awesome shirt.
Thank you.
So some of the problem was that in order to glean the status of any flake issue that's opened, you have to kind of parse through the entire comment thread, which is kind of a painful process. There's not a great way, or we have not been great about exposing the status of all of these flakes, whether someone is actively triaging it, whether there's a fix in progress, or whether it's just been dropped on the floor, other than an absence of communication on the issue. So I think that's what Maru was talking about the poor resolution. And the attribution between test and job ownership, one of the things we did mid-release was update the bot to know how to add labels for SIGs. So we did some work to add SIG ownership. There still is the remaining work of deprecating the individual assignment of test failures. If we do decide that is important. I know there's several people have brought up the auto assignment as not being helpful.
I believe the exact phrasing I've heard within SIG testing a month ago was that the test owners.csv file needs to die in a fire. So I think we're in favor of that. And it sounded like triaging off to SIGs at least chunked up the massive list of 200 plus flakes into more manageable 10 to 20 plus flakes. But I don't know how responsive the SIGs were or not. Again, hopefully it sounds like it went well though.
Very, at least in my experience. I need to. So we're keeping these status reports, week over week with the flake count, so the flake issue counts. So I got to publish a graph with that, but they're all available in raw form on the release 1.6 directory in the Kubernetes features repo. But you see, we started out with the very high normal number from the previous couple of releases, and a very precipitous drop once SIGs were assigned.
Okay, so that's something we should probably continue then for 1.7. It sounds like that's already happening, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe we're driving some work through in SIG testing to start adding aliases for each of the different SIGs and then use the existing owner's mechanism that auto-assigns. We could auto-assign to a SIG user and triage off that way.
Sweet.
Okay. And we've got about 5 minutes left, and I want to reserve 2 of those minutes for the updates at the very end. So I just want to try and make it through these last items. And then what I'm going to ask is everybody do your homework and look at the next section of the retro, which is what we'll do differently, and make notes in there. And this, I assume, will get handed off to SIG release. So if you're passionate about these things, please get involved in SIG release. There cannot be enough participation in SIG release, in my opinion. So just take a look at that when you get a chance. Ihor, you had mentioned that some features got mentioned or merged directly to master without proper view. Did you want to speak to that?
Well, we have actually discussed that at the previous retro last week. So the concern was that some, I'm not speaking only about the features, but probably about some. So about enhancing the global process, how should we follow some steps before something will be merged to some area. Yeah, so it's mostly covered in the document that enhances the features process. It's also linked into the document under the action items in the section comment on the feature release process. So it's not really a major item, but I feel that's important.
Okay.
But I suppose we can speak about it like as the separate item. It's mostly like the global, the part of the global stuff that's related to the features process.
Okay. Justin Santa Barbara, you around? I think this is something that I've heard from multiple people, that code moving around between repos is a challenge. Is there any plan to sort of look at how this happens, this release? Anyone?
Not that I know of, and I would need a little bit expansion of the point that Justin was trying to raise.
Yeah, let's we can take that offline and just find out what he was specifically referring to. But I know there is turnaround cops and some of that stuff. So etcd upgrade path was not discussed enough and was unclear up until the final days of release.
Yeah, I can talk about it. I got my microphone finally working.
Great, thanks, David.
Yeah. So basically, up until the very end of the release, we didn't really have a good plan about how to do this upgrade, and it was a destructive upgrade where we didn't the path that we were suggesting to people didn't have a way to revert in any sort of sane way. So I think that was probably something that we needed to address and just sort of make more clear, just because there's a lot of confusion going into the last days of the release.
Wait, was that after feature freeze? Because I thought I remember that was being discussed pretty early on, even like middle of the release.
Like literally, this goes back release cycles, like back to like 1.4 release cycle when we originally talked about it and sent out docs pertaining to what it would be. In the beginning of the 1.6 release, we put a PSA notice with links to all the documentation of what would be affected. So it's perhaps like that, that same mantra that we should keep on repeating ourselves to repeat ourselves, which would probably help to get the word across. But it was definitely documented and articulated.
So I think it felt like as this Kubernetes community gets larger, it feels like there's hot spots of folks who know important things, and the broad communication may be the challenge. And I know that there were a bunch of people who were talking exactly about what Dan had just discussed. So some folks were very aware of it for a while, as Timothy just said. Broad communication seems to be it, and maybe also broad communication which leads to full delivery and making sure that all of the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. This surprises me a little, that's all.
Well, I think that maybe the meta issue here too is just that if there's anything that goes into a release that's hard to revert or needs extra attention, this gets into the cross-cutting concerns that we keep mentioning. We just need to make sure that there's visibility on these things and it gets championed at every community meeting. Because there's going to be other things that are going to come up just like this that are going to bite us. I hate to do this, but we are out of time. Caleb, do you want to run through the last little announcements real quick? And thank you everybody for your participation in this. This is how we get better, and I appreciate everybody being so awesome on this.
Yes, I would love to run through the announcements. The first one is from Lucas, who is not here. Docker multinode getting started guide is removed from kube deploy repo because it hasn't been updated for a while. Discussion is linked in here, how that all happened. And as mentioned before, we are launching a SIG release that will be focused on improving the release process, release over release, and not making it a fire drill every time to try and staff a release team. So there's a link to the proposal as it is right now, and there's still some final comments that will need to be incorporated, and there's also the mailing list discussion where it was announced, and we'll work through the rest of the ceremony of actually making the SIG itself, creating the mailing lists and labels and whatnot. So it is coming, and more details to follow on meeting times. So we are 1 minute over, so I apologize. Thank you all for participating, and we'll see you all next week, same time, same place.
Thanks for moderating, Caleb.
Happy Thursday, all.
Happy Thursday.
Too much goodness.
Never too much goodness.
What do you say?
Never too much goodness.
It was a perfectly adequate amount of goodness.
Exactly.